The email came in at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning, just as sunlight spilled through my kitchen window. I was stirring cream into my coffee when the subject line caught my eye: wedding venue confirmation, the Harrington Grand. For a second, I smiled. Then I saw the name on the reservation, Lydia Reed. My sister. The same sister who'd laughed 6 months ago when I told her I'd booked that very hotel for my wedding. The same one who'd said, "It's too expensive for you anyway, hon. Maybe stick to something smaller, more realistic." My hand froze over the mug. The cream swirled into a pale cloud before sinking into the dark coffee. I reread the email 3 times, certain it had to be a mistake. But there it was, the deposit, the date, the ballroom I'd spent months fighting to reserve. She hadn't just stolen my venue. She'd stolen my dream. I called her before I could think. When Lydia picked up, her voice was light, cheerful, almost giddy. "Hey sis, guess what I got, the Harrington. Can you believe it?" "Yeah," I said quietly. There was a pause, just long enough for her to realize. "Oh, wait. Oh, Hannah, don't be mad. They said your deposit was still pending, so technically it wasn't locked in." "Pending?" I repeated. "You mean the deposit I sent 6 months ago?" She laughed, that airy little sound she'd used her whole life to brush off guilt. "Oh, come on. It's not like you own the place. And besides, we're family. You'll find something else. You always land on your feet." I stared at the coffee mug, my reflection trembling on the surface. "Lydia," I said softly, "that venue was my dream." She cut me off. "Don't start, okay? You're being dramatic. It's just a building." My jaw tightened. "You knew, didn't you? You knew it was mine." She sighed, long and theatrical. "You're engaged. I'm engaged. Why can't we both be happy? Because happiness doesn't come from stealing someone else's," I wanted to say. But all I managed was silence. Anyway, she continued, "Mom's coming with me to tour it this afternoon. You should come. Maybe it'll help you move on." When the call ended, I stood there in my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. I'd never realized how small my apartment felt until that moment. On the counter sat my wedding binder, pages of floral designs, gold accents, seating charts I'd spent nights perfecting. I closed it slowly, pressing down until the edges bent beneath my hand. That afternoon I drove past the Harrington Grand. The white stone facade gleamed under the sun like nothing in the world could touch it. Through the glass doors I saw Lydia walking with Mom, arms linked, both smiling like they'd won something. Mom was snapping pictures, her voice bright with pride. I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. When Lydia spotted me, she waved a cheerful, clueless little gesture, as if she hadn't just erased months of my work. That night Mom called. Her tone was soft, careful, the way she always sounded when she thought I might cry. "Sweetheart, I heard about the venue. Grace told me she felt terrible." "Did she?" I asked. "She really didn't mean for it to upset you. She just acted fast. You know how she is, impulsive." "Mom, I booked that place 6 months ago. She knew." "Honey," she said, her voice sharpening, "it's better not to make a scene. Lydia's under a lot of stress. The wedding's coming up." "So was mine," I whispered. There was a pause. I could picture her frown, that little pursing of lips that always meant, "Be the bigger person." "You know how Lydia is," she said finally. "Just let it go. Let it go." Those 3 words had been the family motto for as long as I could remember. Let it go when she took the front seat. Let it go when she got the praise. Let it go when she got away with everything. I hung up and sat in the dark, the city lights flickering against the window. 34 years of being told to stay calm, stay nice, stay small. I'd believed that was strength. But now I saw what it really was: silence. The next morning I opened my folders and scrolled through every document tied to the Harrington Grand. Each receipt, each confirmation, all in my name. She had taken the stage, but I still owned the lights. A strange, steady calm washed over me. It wasn't rage, it was clarity. I poured myself a new cup of coffee, warm and dark and bitter. My reflection stared back at me from the mug, older, somehow steadier. For the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt awake. When the phone buzzed again, another message from Mom, another plea to make peace, I didn't answer. I just whispered to the empty room, peace is overrated. Outside, the morning light glinted off the skyline. Somewhere my sister was celebrating what she thought was victory. She'd forgotten one thing: every theft leaves a trail. And I knew exactly where hers began. 2 days passed before I stopped expecting an apology that would never come. By Thursday morning, the silence had settled into something heavier than anger. I woke up to sunlight cutting across the floor, my coffee machine sputtering in the background, and my phone lighting up with a group message from Mom, titled Family Wedding Updates. I didn't have to open it to know what it was about. Lydia's face was probably all over it, her fittings, her flowers, her perfect new life built on my money. I tossed the phone aside and stared at the wedding binder I'd pushed to the corner of the kitchen table. I hadn't touched it since that day. The gold edges of the pages looked dull now. It was strange how quickly something that once felt like hope could turn into evidence of humiliation. Around noon, my best friend Rachel dropped by with bagels, and that look she always had when she'd heard gossip. "You look like hell," she said, sliding the paper bag across the counter. "So are we talking about it, or are we pretending the explosion didn't happen?" I stared at her. "Which explosion?" "The one where your sister stole your wedding." I let out a small laugh. "Oh, that one." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You're way too calm, which means you're either plotting or depressed." "Maybe both," I said, sipping my coffee. She leaned on the counter. "So tell me everything, from the email to your inevitable nervous breakdown." I told her everything: the email, the call, Mom's reaction. When I finished, she whistled. "That's cold even for Lydia." "I mean, she's done petty, but that's professional-grade betrayal." I shrugged. "She's efficient. I'll give her that." Rachel stared at me for a long moment. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "I don't know," I said quietly. "I keep thinking maybe I should. Maybe it's not worth it." "Hon," she said, her voice softening, "you've been letting things go since college. Since the time she borrowed your car and totaled it. Since your mom told you to be understanding about it. Maybe letting go is the problem." Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I looked away, focusing on the steam rising from my mug. "You ever realize that forgiveness just teaches people how to hurt you better?" Rachel didn't answer right away. "So, what's the plan?" "I don't have one," I lied. She smirked. "You will, you always do." After she left, I sat at the table, scrolling through my emails. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but then I saw the transaction confirmation from 6 months ago, the one showing my deposit to the Harrington Grand. The PDF attachment stared back at me like a confession written in someone else's hand. Every number, every date, every line in black and white, proof that the dream had been mine first. I clicked open another message, one from the hotel's event manager, a man named Mr. Nolan. He'd sent it months ago. "We're delighted to host your wedding, Miss Bennett. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions." I hesitated, then began typing. "Hi, Mr. Nolan. I'd like to confirm the current status of my reservation for the Harrington Ballroom on June 14. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. An hour later, his reply arrived. "Miss Bennett, thank you for reaching out. Our records show the reservation was recently updated under the name Lydia Reed. However, since the account and initial payment remain under your name, we will need clarification on authorization before making further changes." I read that sentence 3 times, my pulse quickening. Under my name. Still under my name. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the glow of my laptop screen reflecting on the ceiling, rereading the email until the words blurred. Lydia hadn't even bothered to change ownership. She'd just assumed the world would adjust itself around her. That was her pattern: take, smile, move on. And I'd always let her. At 2 in the morning, I got up and started pulling out every document I could find: receipts, bank statements, email threads. By 3, the floor was covered in paper. By 4, I had an idea forming that felt too calm to be anger. The next morning, I called the bank. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I'd like to discuss an account authorization issue." The woman on the line transferred me to a manager. His name was Nolan too. What were the odds? His tone was polite, precise, and professional. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I see here that you opened this account 2 years ago. The only authorized users listed are yourself and one temporary cardholder for a limited transfer window. May I ask the issue?" I hesitated. "Someone accessed my funds without my consent. My sister." "I'm sorry to hear that," he said calmly. "Did she have access to your card or online credentials?" "Yes, but not permission." "Understood. We can trace the transactions and flag them for review. Any large transfers recently?" I looked at the printout in front of me. $80,000. There was a pause. "That qualifies." He told me to come in the next day with identification. I thanked him, hung up, and sat very still. My heart was racing, but not from panic. From purpose. Around noon, Mom called again. "Sweetheart, I hope you're feeling better," she said in that careful tone that meant she was about to say something that would hurt. "Lydia told me she's worried about you. You shouldn't let jealousy ruin things between you." "Jealousy," I repeated. "She didn't mean to upset you, Hannah. It's just a venue." "Mom, she took my money." "Now, don't start exaggerating. You probably just gave her your card by mistake." "You're both adults," sorted out quietly. "Family first," remember that phrase again. Family first. It always meant Hannah last. "Sure, Mom," I said flatly. Family first. After the call, I opened my laptop again and drafted a note to myself in bold letters. "Stop waiting for fairness from people who benefit from your silence." That afternoon, I took a walk downtown. Denver was soft and gray, the air cool against my skin. I passed shop windows filled with lace dresses, wedding shoes, floral arrangements. Every display felt like a taunt. I stopped in front of one boutique, staring at a mannequin in a white gown, and caught my own reflection behind it, tired, hollow-eyed, but steady. Inside, a song was playing, something slow and romantic. I almost turned away, but something about the melody held me there. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned itself out. What I felt now was colder, quieter, the space that comes after. That evening, Rachel texted me dinner at my place. "Bring wine. We're talking strategy." I smiled for the first time in days. When I arrived, she already had 2 glasses poured. "You've been thinking," she said. "I can see it on your face." I called the bank. Her eyes widened. "And they're reviewing the transactions. Everything's still under my name." Her grin was instant. "Oh my God. So technically she just threw herself a wedding with your money." "Technically," I said, sipping my wine. Rachel leaned forward. "So what now? You could report her. Freeze the funds. Hell, sue her." "I don't want to drag it through court," I said. "I just want her to feel what I felt. To understand what it's like to lose something you thought was yours." "That's poetic," Rachel said. "Terrifyingly poetic." I laughed quietly. "It's not revenge," I said. "It's balance." When I got home later, the city was silent. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the email from Mr. Nolan, the one that had started it all. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat beside my name. Under my name. Still under my name. I whispered it out loud, and it felt like a promise. For the first time since Lydia's call, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. I felt steady, the kind of steady that comes right before a storm. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The air in my apartment felt different, charged like the seconds before a thunderstorm. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the folder I'd organized the night before. Every receipt, every transfer, every email tied to the Harrington account. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. At 7 sharp, I grabbed my jacket and headed downtown. The streets were still half asleep, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the only person in the world who knows something's about to change. The Denver First Bank building looked sterile and calm, all glass and gray steel. Inside, the air was cool, filled with the faint smell of toner and carpet cleaner. I checked in with the front desk, gave my name, and waited. A few minutes later, A man in his 50s stepped out from a side office, gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of face that had seen too many disputes like mine but still tried to stay kind. "Miss Bennett," he said, shaking my hand. "I'm Nolan." His name made me smile faintly. "Another Mr. Nolan. Seems to be my week." He gestured toward his office. "Let's see what's going on." I followed him into a small windowed room, lined with framed photos of mountains and financial awards. He sat behind his desk, typed something into his computer, and waited for the system to load. "All right," he said. "You mentioned unauthorized activity on your account." "Yes," I said, sliding a folder toward him. "Here are the statements. The transactions are large, $80,000 total. My sister used the funds for her wedding." He nodded, scanning the pages with the same calm precision I imagined he used for everything in life. "All right, let's confirm the structure. You opened the account yourself." "Yes, the only authorized user was me. I allowed temporary access a few months ago, but it expired long before this." He clicked something on his screen. "You're correct. The account is solely under your name. The second cardholder's access expired in March, which means," he looked up, "legally any recent transfers are invalid without your consent." The words hung there like a quiet verdict. So I said slowly, "The payments can be traced." "To the penny," he replied. "Would you like a detailed breakdown?" "Yes." He printed a stack of papers, the machine whirring steadily between us. When he handed them over, I saw the names Palm Springs, Grand Resort, Magnolia Florals, LeClaire Catering, all linked to Lydia's wedding. I studied the numbers like they were coordinates on a treasure map, each one pointing to something she'd taken. Mr. Nolan folded his hands. "We can flag the account and freeze future transfers while we review the case. Would you like us to do that?" I looked out the glass wall behind him where sunlight hit the city in long, thin strips. "Not yet," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "May I ask why? Because she needs to think everything's fine?" He paused, then smiled, not mockingly, but with a kind of respect. "Understood. Some people prefer to handle things quietly." "Quietly suits me," I said. He leaned back in his chair. "I'll set a monitoring alert. Any time a transaction exceeds $10,000, you'll receive a direct notification before it processes. And if you choose to reverse all existing payments, one call from you will trigger it. It would take about 24 hours to finalize." I nodded slowly, feeling the words settle into place like pieces of a chess game. "One call," I repeated. "Exactly. But once it's initiated," he warned, "there's no way to stop it. Everything connected to your account would be recalled automatically." "That's fine," I said. "I'm not planning to stop it." He hesitated, studying me. "Most people come in furious. You seem calm." "Anger fades," I said. "Organization lasts." He gave a soft chuckle. "You're not the first person to say that, but you might be the first to mean it." By the time I left the bank, the sun was high and bright, reflecting off the building's glass walls like a mirror. I could see my own face in the reflection, steady, almost cold. I didn't look like someone who'd been wronged anymore. I looked like someone who'd started taking notes. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the chill air. It felt cleaner, somehow sharper. Across the street, people hurried past, carrying coffees, briefcases, plans. None of them knew that somewhere in the quiet system of digital numbers and transfers, justice was already taking shape. That night, Rachel called. "So," she asked, "how'd it go?" "It's handled," I said. "Handled how I talked to the bank. Everything's still in my name. Every dollar, every receipt." She went quiet. "You're scaring me a little." "I'm not doing anything illegal." "That's not what I meant," she said softly. "You sound like someone who stopped caring about consequences." I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the deep red cling to the sides. "I care," I said. "Just not about the same things anymore." She sighed. "You know, revenge doesn't always fix what's broken." "I'm not looking to fix it," I said. "I'm just closing the account." She didn't have an answer for that. When the call ended, I sat by the window staring out at the lights of Denver. Somewhere out there, Lydia was probably finalizing her menu, bragging about her dream venue, maybe even practicing her vows. I wondered if she had any idea what those dreams were built on. The next morning, I met with Mr. Nolan again to sign the final documents. He slid the papers across the desk, pointing to each section as he spoke. This authorizes you to recall the transactions at any time. No explanation required. I signed my name slowly, deliberately. The sound of the pen against paper felt heavier than it should have. "When do you want the trigger date?" he asked. I looked up. June 14th. He typed it in. "The wedding day, yes." He gave a small approving nod. Poetic. As I stood to leave, he smiled. "You know, Miss Bennett, you're one of the calmest people I've met in a situation like this." "Calm," I said, "is just preparation in disguise." That night, I spread all the signed documents across my kitchen table, smoothing the edges with my palms. I created a new folder on my laptop, June 14, Plan. Inside it, I saved digital copies of everything, contracts, statements, reversal forms. Each file a small, silent promise. Then I poured myself another glass of wine and sat back staring at the folder name glowing on my screen. June 14th. Her wedding day. I could picture it already, Lydia standing under white arches, holding hands with the man she claimed to love, smiling like she hadn't borrowed someone else's future to make it happen. Guests in pastel dresses, champagne glasses clinking. A perfect day built on theft. And then somewhere behind all that music and laughter, a phone ringing. A polite voice from the bank saying, "We're sorry, Mrs. Reed, but the payment could not be processed." I took a slow breath, my pulse steady. Justice, I whispered to myself, doesn't always need an audience. On the counter beside me, the coffee machine beeped, done brewing another cup. The sound was soft but grounding. I poured it out, took a sip, and let the bitterness roll across my tongue. For years I'd been told that revenge was destructive, that it consumed the person who held it. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe it wasn't destruction. Maybe it was balance. Quiet, precise, inevitable balance. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stood by the window one last time before bed. The city shimmered beneath me, every building glowing, every window alive with someone else's story. But tonight I wasn't looking at their lights. I was looking at my reflection. And for once I liked what I saw. 3 days later, the first post went up. I wasn't tagged in it, but Rachel sent it to me before breakfast. Lydia stood in front of a row of white roses, her hair curled perfectly, her smile wide enough to hurt. The caption read, "Dreams really do come true. Thank you to my amazing fiancé and family for making this possible." Underneath, Mom had commented, "You deserve every bit of this happiness, sweetheart. Sisters are forever." I stared at that last line until the words blurred. Sisters are forever. The irony was almost impressive. I didn't comment. I didn't even click like. I just set the phone down and poured my coffee. The bitterness burned more than usual, and maybe that was fitting. At noon, Rachel showed up holding her phone like it was radioactive. "Have you seen it?" I have. She grimaced. She's really out here pretending she's the victim of the universe. Sisters are forever. That's sociopathic PR. She's always been good at marketing herself, I said quietly. Rachel sat on the counter. "You're going to do something right, I already am," I said. Just not the way she expects. I didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. We'd been friends long enough for her to recognize that tone, the one that meant the wheels were already turning. That afternoon, I went through my inbox again. The email from the bank was sitting there calm and patient. Transaction reversal authorized for June 149:00 a.m. I clicked it open and reread the line like a prayer. The next few days passed in fragments, Lydia's endless wedding updates on social media, Mom's texts about being supportive, Dad's neutral silences that somehow said everything. I watched it all like someone standing outside their own life, invisible behind glass. Every post, every comment, every photo of them laughing in pastel perfection only made me feel more certain. They were too comfortable in their illusion. They'd mistaken my quiet for surrender. On Saturday, I drove by Mom's house. Her car was in the driveway, and through the front window, I could see her and Lydia sitting at the table surrounded by flower samples and fabric swatches. Mom's voice carried faintly through the open window. "You're so organized, Lydia. You're going to be a beautiful bride." Lydia laughed, that soft, sugary tone that used to charm teachers and neighbors alike. I turned off the engine and just sat there watching them. The same old scene. Mom doting Lydia, glowing me nowhere in the frame. I'd grown up in that imbalance. It used to ache. Now it just clarified things. I didn't go inside. I just rolled down the window, let the sound drift out, the laughter, the clinking of teacups, the unspoken hierarchy. Then I started the car and drove away. That evening, Mom called. "Sweetheart," she began in her gentle, careful voice, "I hope you're not still upset. Lydia told me she invited you to the bridal brunch." "I'm busy," I said. "Oh, come on, Hannah. It would mean so much to her. I'm sure it would." Mom hesitated. "You know she didn't mean to hurt you. You've always been the mature one. Maybe you can be the bigger person again." "Mom," I said slowly, "what if being the bigger person just means being the easiest one to hurt?" She sighed. "I wish you'd let go of this grudge." "I did," I said. "That's why you don't see it coming." There was silence. Then she said, "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, Mom," I said softly. "Just forget it." I hung up before she could answer. Later that night, I sat by the window with a glass of wine, watching the city lights flicker like small confessions. Somewhere across town, Lydia was probably toasting herself with champagne. Maybe she was showing Mom her wedding playlist or trying on another dress. I thought about all the times I'd been told to forgive, to forget, to understand, to stay small, and I realized something forgiveness isn't noble when it's demanded. It's just another form of control. The next morning, I opened my laptop and checked my emails. One new message blinked at the top from Mr. Nolan at the bank. "Just confirming everything is in place for your June 14 recall. If you wish to make adjustments, please let us know before the 10th. I smiled. No adjustments needed. Then I closed the laptop and got ready for work. At the office, people were talking about wedding season, the dress trends, the venues, the cost of catering. One coworker, Lisa, asked if I was planning my own wedding yet. I just said, "Not anymore." She laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Good for you, save the stress." I smiled, but it wasn't a joke. That evening, Rachel called again. "So," she said, "what's your timeline?" "June 14. "That's poetic," she said. "You really are terrifying when you get calm." "Calm is underrated," I said. "It gets things done." She laughed softly. "Promise me something." "What?" "When this is over, you'll let yourself be happy. Don't get stuck in the payback." "I'm not in payback," I said. "I'm in restoration." We hung up, and for a while, I just sat there in the quiet. My phone buzzed again, a notification from Lydia's account. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. The post showed her and Mom at the Harrington Grand, posing in front of the entrance. Lydia's caption read, "6 weeks to go until forever." Mom had commented again, "So proud of you both." I stared at the photo for a long time. Lydia's hand was resting on Mom's arm, both of them smiling at the camera. You could almost believe it was pure love. Almost. I took a screenshot and saved it to a folder on my desktop labeled Evidence. That night I dreamed of the ballroom. The high ceilings, the gold chandeliers, the polished marble floors. Except in the dream, the lights kept flickering, and Lydia's bouquet wilted in her hands. When she turned to me, her voice was distant, like it was coming from underwater. "Why would you do this to me?" she asked. I woke up before I could answer. The next morning I drove past the Harrington again. The valet was polishing the brass railings outside. Through the tall glass windows, I could see the empty ballroom being prepped for another event, a corporate dinner maybe. The staff were setting tables, arranging flowers, moving in rhythm. I parked across the street and just watched. I could almost see it, Lydia walking down the aisle, the guests applauding the illusion, holding together just long enough to look perfect. Then I imagined the moment it would all fall apart. A phone call. A confused manager. A credit card declined. The look on her face when the words "funds reversed" reached her. I closed my eyes, letting that image settle in. It wasn't joy I felt. It wasn't vengeance. It was relief, like breathing for the first time after years underwater. As I started the car again, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked calm. Maybe too calm. I thought about something Mr. Nolan had said. Once you trigger it, there's no going back. Good, I thought. No going back was the point. By the time I got home, the sky was a deep indigo, the kind that makes the city glow. I poured myself a drink, opened my folder, and clicked through the documents again. Everything was in place. Every dollar, every authorization, every legal detail that tied my name to hers. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page and whispered the date under my breath. June 14th. Her wedding day. The day balance would return. The bank was quieter than I expected. A low hum of printers, the faint shuffle of paper, and the kind of chill air that smelled like rules. I sat across from Mr. Nolan in his office again, my palms flat on the cool desk, as he scrolled through a list of transactions on his screen. The blue light flickered across his glasses, reflecting columns of numbers I already knew by heart. "You were right," he said finally, his tone calm and professional. "Every payment linked to the event still routes back through your original account." He turned the monitor slightly toward me. Hotel florist, catering, photography, all under Hannah Bennett. Even the venue reservation hasn't been fully transferred. "So she never updated the ownership?" I asked, my voice steady. "Not properly," he said, leaning back. "She listed herself as an authorized event contact, but the billing structure remains yours. The account holder, meaning you, retains control." I studied the screen. Every line felt like a pulse, each transaction a vein, feeding a body that didn't belong to her. "Can you trace it all to the penny?" I nodded slowly. "Good." He folded his hands. "I can freeze the account today if you'd like." "Not yet," I said. "If she thinks everything's fine, she'll keep digging herself deeper. I'd rather she walk right into it." He smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who's done this before." "Just someone who's learned what happens when you trust the wrong people," I said. He clicked a few more buttons. "Then here's what we can do. I'll set up a monitoring trigger. Any transaction over 10,000 will notify you first. You'll have 24 hours to confirm or reject. And you can recall every vendor payment with one call." "One call," I repeated softly. "One," he said. "But once you initiate, it can't be undone. The reversal will hit every vendor account simultaneously. Hotel caterer, florist, the funds return to you. And then she'll have a lot of explaining to do." He paused, watching me carefully. "Most people in your position are angry. You seem focused." "I'm tired," I said. "Anger burns too fast. I want something that lasts." He nodded. "Structure lasts." I almost smiled. "Exactly." By the time I left his office, the late morning sun was spilling across the marble floor of the lobby. The world outside felt ordinary, people buying coffee, cars honking, someone laughing into a phone, but everything in me had shifted. It was strange realizing that justice didn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrived on paper, stamped and notarized. That night, I met Rachel at a small bar off Colfax. She was already halfway through her drink when I walked in. "You look calm," she said as I sat down. "That's unnerving." "Calm is efficient," I said. "Okay," she said, tilting her head. "Efficient about what?" "The bank confirmed everything. The money, the vendors, the contracts, all mine." Her eyebrows shot up. "So technically she's planning a wedding with your wallet." "Technically," I said, taking a sip of my drink. Rachel leaned closer. "And what are you going to do?" "I've set the recall date," I said. "When, June 14th? Her mouth opened slightly. "On her wedding day," I nodded. Rachel stared at me for a long moment, then smiled a slow, disbelieving smile. "You're terrifying." "I mean that as a compliment." I didn't answer. The hum of the bar filled the space between us, a soft buzz of laughter and glass clinking. I traced my finger along the rim of my glass, feeling the smooth edge. "She took my savings," I said quietly. $80,000. That wasn't a mistake, it was entitlement dressed as love. Rachel nodded slowly. "You're not wrong. She'll call it overreaction," I said. "They all will. But for once, I'm done making excuses for people who step on me and call it care." Rachel watched me for a while, then said softly, "You've got that look again." "What look?" "The one that means you're about to do something dangerously calm." I smiled faintly. Maybe calm is overdue. We talked for a while longer about work, about how Denver summers always smelled faintly of rain and dust. But the whole time part of me was already elsewhere, counting days, watching the invisible gears turn toward balance. When I got home, I set my bag down and turned on the lamp over the kitchen counter. The apartment felt too still, like it was holding its breath. I opened my laptop, created a new folder on the desktop, and named it June 14, Plan. Inside it, I saved everything: the reversal form, the vendor list, my bank authorization, the timeline. Each file was labeled neatly, each step documented. The folder was my blueprint, not for revenge, but for order. The clock on the wall ticked softly, 10:47 p.m. I poured a glass of water, stood by the window, and looked out over the city. The lights stretched endlessly. Every one of them a story, a secret, a small piece of someone's life. Somewhere among them, Lydia was probably asleep, believing the world would keep bending for her. It always had, until now. My phone buzzed. Mom again. I didn't answer. A minute later, another message appeared. "Please try to be kind to your sister. She's under stress. You'll understand one day." I turned the screen face down on the counter. "I already do," I murmured. I sat back at my desk and flipped through the printed pages from the bank. Mr. Nolan had even highlighted the line that mattered most: account holder Hannah Bennett. I underlined it in ink, not because I needed to remember, but because it felt like claiming something I'd been trained my whole life to surrender. For the first time in months, I slept without dreams. The next morning, I woke early and brewed fresh coffee. The aroma filled the kitchen, earthy and rich. I opened my laptop and glanced at the folder glowing on the screen. June 14, Plan. Just seeing the name steadied me. By 8, I was walking out the door, documents tucked into my bag. My shoes clicked against the pavement with deliberate rhythm. Outside, the sun was sharp and white, the air crisp with that early summer clarity that makes everything look more honest. I stopped at a red light, watching cars pass, people laughing, someone rushing with a bouquet of flowers wrapped in paper. The smell of lilies drifted briefly in my direction. For a second, I thought of Lydia, how she'd look on that day, draped in silken confidence, every camera on her, every smile rehearsed. And how, at exactly 9 a.m., the phone would ring, and her perfect world would fracture without me ever raising my voice. That thought didn't thrill me. It didn't sadden me either. It just felt right. When I reached the office, I emailed Mr. Nolan one last confirmation. Everything set for June 14th, 9 a.m. No changes. His reply came minutes later. Confirmed. Best of luck, Miss Bennett. Luck had nothing to do with it. That night, Rachel texted me, "You still good with your plan?" Yes, no nerves, none. She sent back a single message. "You know peace looks good on you, even if it's terrifying." I stared at the words for a long time before replying. Peace isn't quiet, it's precise. When I set my phone down, the apartment was silent again, just the hum of the fridge and the faint tick of the clock. I opened my laptop one last time, the folder still glowing on the desktop. I clicked it open, checked each file, and whispered to no one, everything in order. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, low, steady, patient. Balance was coming, and for once I didn't have to chase it. It was already on its way. The first thing I saw that morning was her face on my phone screen. Lydia smiling like she'd never done a thing wrong. Her post had gone up overnight, her standing in front of a mirror in a pale pink robe, surrounded by bridesmaids, a flute of champagne in her hand. The caption read, "Family makes dreams possible. Couldn't do this without you." The you in that sentence was me, though she'd never admit it. Mom's comment sat just below. "So proud of you, darling. Sisters forever." That phrase again. Sisters forever. It was starting to sound like a curse. I didn't hit like. I didn't write a comment. I just scrolled past it, poured coffee, and tried not to think about how good she was at rewriting history. By the time I sat down, another post appeared, her and Mom outside the Harringtons, smiling for the camera. Lydia's caption: "Touring our dream venue." Mom's reply: "Perfection runs in the family." I almost laughed. Rachel texted me a screenshot. "You seeing this? She's milking it like a reality show." Let her. I typed back. People who live for attention rarely notice when the ground starts to shift under them. Rachel replied with a single emoji, a volcano. By afternoon, Lydia's stories were endless. Cake tasting, dress fittings, a sneak peek of our vows. She wasn't just planning a wedding, she was broadcasting a fairy tale curated in pastels and filters. I watched each clip without sound, just the visual: Mom laughing in the background, Lydia glowing under chandeliers. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up sketching that ballroom layout, choosing every shade of gold and cream only for her to take it like a free sample. But watching it now didn't hurt. It was oddly clarifying. Every smile, every caption, every proud comment from Mom, it all made the next step easier. At 6, my phone buzzed again. Mom calling. "Honey," she said when I answered, "Lydia told me she hasn't heard from you in weeks. She's worried." "I'm sure she is," Mom sighed. "You can't stay angry forever." "I'm not angry," I said. "Then what are you observant?" She paused. "That's not funny. Listen, she's under so much pressure. Weddings are stressful. You remember how emotional you were when you got engaged?" "Yes," I said. "I remember every part of it. She wants you involved, sweetheart. She said she'd love for you to come to the rehearsal dinner." "To watch her marry herself, Hannah," she scolded. "Don't be spiteful. You've always been the responsible one. I know you'll do what's right." I almost smiled. "You're right about that, Mom. I will." She didn't catch the tone. "Good. That's my girl. Family sticks together." After the call, I sat in silence. The apartment felt too still, too clean, like something was waiting. I opened my laptop and clicked on the folder June 14, plan. The documents glowed against the dark background. I scrolled through the timeline, each step precise, legal, irreversible. Everything was ready. At 10 p.m., Rachel called. "Okay, I need to ask," she said. "You're really going through with this?" "Yes. You could still warn her, you know. Give her a chance to fix it." "She had one," I said. 6 months ago." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "You know what I realized about you, I'm afraid to ask? You don't explode. You dissolve people quietly." I let out a soft laugh. "Explosions are messy. I prefer balance," she sighed. "Balance is good. Just make sure you're doing this for the right reason." "I am," I said. "I'm doing it because for once I want the consequence to match the crime." The next morning, I got an email from the bank: scheduled payment notice, final transfer, June 14. It looked like any other automated message, polite and precise. But I could feel the weight of it. Under pending approval, the name Lydia Reed appeared, her signature digital and smug. I stared at it for a long time. I whispered, "You really think you can buy your way through everything, don't you?" I hit print. The pages came out warm, smelling faintly of ink. I laid them flat on my table and placed my coffee cup beside them. Every page, every line proof that she'd underestimated me. By noon, I went for a walk downtown. The streets were busy, summer tourists stopping for photos, couples holding hands. I passed a florist's window, white lilies, pale roses, the kind Lydia had picked for her ceremony. I remembered her words exactly. "They're pure, timeless, like me." I almost stopped to laugh. Back home, I found another message from Mom. Don't forget to bring something nice to wear for the rehearsal dinner. Lydia wants you seated near the family table. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Some messages didn't deserve answers. That evening I met Rachel again. The sky was pink, with fading sunlight, and the air smelled faintly of rain. We sat on her balcony with 2 glasses of wine and watched the clouds move over the city. So, she said, the countdown's on. Yep! She swirled her glass. You ever feel bad, like even a little I thought about it? No, I said. I feel justified. And maybe a little sad that it had to come to this. Sad, because of her, sad, because of what it says about all of us, I said. That I had to turn into this version of myself just to be heard. Rachel nodded slowly. Maybe that's what justice looks like sometimes. Not loud, just accurate. Accurate, I repeated. I liked the sound of that. When I got home later, I opened my window and let the night air drift in. Somewhere below, a car alarm went off and stopped again. The city hummed steady and indifferent. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Lydia. Hey, just wanted to check in. Mom says you've been quiet. Everything okay? I stared at it. She didn't sound guilty. She never did. Everything's fine, I typed back. I'm looking forward to the big day, she replied instantly. Good. You're still my maid of honor, right? I didn't answer. I closed the chat and turned my phone face down. The next morning I woke early. Rain had fallen overnight and the world looked rinsed clean. I made coffee, sat by the window and watched the drops slide down the glass. The quiet was perfect. Controlled. In 5 days she'd walk into that ballroom certain that everything was hers. She'd smile for photos, raise a glass, play the part she'd written for herself. And at exactly 9 a.m., the phone would ring. The manager would step aside, voice polite but firm. I'm sorry, Mrs. Reed. The payment for your event has been reversed. Her smile would falter just for a second before the world around her began to unravel. I could almost see it. It wasn't anger that filled me. It wasn't even anticipation. It was something calmer, sharper, the peace that comes from knowing the balance sheet was about to close. Before bed that night, I checked the countdown timer I'd set on my phone. June 14900 a.m. The screen glowed in the dark, cold and perfect. Every storm starts quietly, and I was ready for the rain. The morning of the rehearsal dinner arrived, wrapped in sunlight and noise. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Mom, Lydia, a dozen group chats that I'd been forcibly added to. Everyone was talking about dresses, floral arrangements, the photographer's vision. I scrolled through the messages in silence, each one confirming what I already knew. They didn't see me as part of this wedding. I was background music, expected to play quietly. At 9 a.m., Mom called. Honey, don't forget to bring something elegant. Lydia's thinking of ivory for the theme tonight. She wants everyone coordinated. I'll wear whatever I want, I said. She sighed like she always did when I didn't play along. Please, Hannah, this is a special time for your sister. Don't make it about you. Don't worry, Mom, I said softly. This isn't about me at all. She didn't catch the undertone. Good. I knew you'd come around. When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. My face looked calm, expressionless, like a photo taken before a storm. The hours drifted by. Lydia's posts filled my feed. Final dress, fitting brunch with the girls, blessed beyond words. Each one was polished, filtered, carefully composed. It wasn't a wedding, it was a production. At noon, I got an email from the bank. Reminder: scheduled transaction reversal, pending June 14900 a.m. Please confirm no changes required. I typed back one sentence, proceed as scheduled. Then I closed the laptop and exhaled. The sound of it felt like release. By late afternoon, Rachel texted me. Still planning to go tonight? Of course, I replied. Wouldn't want to miss the family show. She sent back a single word, brave. I laughed to myself. It wasn't bravery, it was observation. At 6:30, I arrived at the Harrington Grand for the dinner. The place shimmered crystal chandeliers, golden flatware polished marble that reflected every light twice. The ballroom smelled of peonies and wealth. Lydia stood near the entrance in a white cocktail dress, her arms outstretched. "You came," she said, her smile wide enough to blind. "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." She hugged me like we hadn't gone months without speaking. "You look great," she said. Simple but classy. It's very you. "Translation underdressed?" I asked. She laughed too loudly. "Oh, stop. You know I love you." Mom swooped in, then her perfume, a cloud of roses and command. "Hannah, sweetheart, you made it." She kissed my cheek, then whispered, "Thank you for being gracious." I smiled thinly. "Always." Dinner was served under soft lights, the kind meant to flatter and hide at the same time. Lydia sat at the center of the table, glowing under the attention. Her fiancé Mark leaned close to her, whispering something that made her laugh. Mom watched them with watery eyes, and Dad sat stiff beside her, trying to look engaged. Every toast, every compliment felt rehearsed. The words "perfect" and "blessed" floated through the air like overused perfume. When Lydia stood to give her little speech, I felt the room's gaze shift to her like sunlight. "I just want to thank everyone who made this possible," she said. "Especially my family. Mom, Dad, Mark, you've all been amazing. And Hannah," she paused, dramatically hand pressed to her chest, "thank you for your endless support even when things got complicated." There were polite laughs, a few nods. I stared at her, my fork motionless. She smiled at me sweetly, the kind of smile that said I win. I raised my glass. "To complications," I said. "They teach us who we really are." A few guests chuckled. Lydia blinked uncertain for half a second before the smile snapped back into place. Mom gave me a warning look from across the table, the kind that had silenced me since childhood. I ignored it. After dinner, guests drifted toward the bar, the air thick with champagne and shallow praise. I slipped outside to the balcony. The night was cool, the city glowing below like 1,000 small secrets. A door opened behind me. "Thought I'd find you here," Rachel's voice said. She'd managed to slip in through a side entrance, looking amused. "I didn't think you'd actually come," I said. "I told you I wanted front row seats," she replied, joining me by the railing. "So, how's the happy family performing beautifully?" She studied my face. "You're quiet. That's either good or terrifying." "Maybe both," I said. Rachel leaned her elbows on the railing. "You sure you're ready for what's coming?" "Yes," I said. "I've been ready for years. Tomorrow's just paperwork catching up." "Paperwork with an $80,000 soundtrack," she said, smirking. I smiled faintly. Balance has a price tag. We stood in silence for a moment, the hum of traffic below blending with the distant sound of laughter from the ballroom. Rachel finally said, "You know, I used to think revenge was about winning. Now I think it's just about being seen." I looked out at the skyline. Exactly. When I went back inside, the music had started, soft jazz couples swaying under golden lights. Lydia and Mark danced in the center of the room, every move choreographed for photographs. Mom watched like it was a movie she'd already seen 100 times but still loved. I found my seat, poured myself another glass of wine, and let the noise fade into a dull hum. For once, I wasn't angry. I was detached, almost peaceful. Toward the end of the night, Lydia floated over, cheeks flushed from champagne. "See," she said brightly. "We're fine. You're here. I'm happy. Everything's how it should be. Everything I asked." "Of course," she said, grinning. "Tomorrow's going to be perfect." I tilted my head. You really believe that? Her smile wavered for just a moment. "Yes," she said, forcing it back. "Why wouldn't I?" "No reason," I said. "Just curious." She laughed, brushing it off. "God, you're so weird sometimes." Mom appeared beside her, looping an arm through hers. "Come on, Lydia. Let's not keep everyone waiting. We still have to go over the schedule for the morning." As they walked away, Mom glanced back at me. Her eyes held the same message they always had. Don't ruin this. I smiled at her and lifted my glass in a mock toast. On the drive home, the city lights blurred through the windshield. My phone buzzed with notifications, photos from the dinner-tagged posts, Lydia's latest caption, "Tomorrow forever begins." I pulled over at a red light and looked at it for a long moment before setting the phone face down. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. No explosions, no chaos. Just one quiet, undeniable truth: the world Lydia built on my money would finally collapse under its own weight. When I got home, I opened the folder one last time. The files sat there like obedient soldiers: contracts, receipts, authorizations. My entire plan distilled into clean lines and timestamps. At the top of the screen, one message blinked: automated reminder. Scheduled reversal in less than 12 hours. I hovered my finger over the touchpad, feeling the faint pulse of the machine beneath it. Let it run, I whispered. The city outside was silent, the kind of silence that only comes before something breaks. I turned off the light and stood by the window, watching dawn begin to touch the edges of the sky. Somewhere across town, Lydia was probably dreaming about her perfect day, and I was wide awake waiting for mine. The sound of rain woke me before dawn. Soft, steady, unhurried. For a few seconds, I just lay there listening to it hit the window like the world was washing itself clean before the day began. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and checked the time. 6:42. 2 hours and 18 minutes. I made coffee black and slow-dripped and watched it swirl in the cup until the surface stilled. My kitchen clock ticked louder than usual. Every second felt heavy, deliberate. The kind of morning where silence means something is coming. At 8, my phone buzzed a message from Rachel. "You up?" Barely, I typed back. "Want me to come over?" "No. You'll hear it anyway." She sent back a single emoji, a storm cloud. By 8:30, I was sitting by the window, the coffee gone cold, the city outside coming to life. A bus hissed to a stop. Someone laughed below. Somewhere across town, photographers were adjusting tripods, bridesmaids curling hair, and Lydia was slipping into her designer gown. She probably looked perfect. She always did when everything was about to go wrong. At 8:50, I opened my laptop. The folder blinked on the desktop. June 14, plan. I double-clicked it. Inside, every file sat in order: contracts, reversal authorizations, bank confirmations. Each one clean, quiet, ready. The cursor hovered over one file labeled Execute Transfer Reversal. I took a breath, steady and slow. Then I clicked. A small pop-up appeared on the screen. Processing transaction reversal. Confirm. I pressed yes. And that was it. No explosion, no music. Just a faint sound, a soft electronic ding, and then stillness. For a long moment, I stared at the screen. Then I whispered, "Done." The clock read 9 o'clock sharp. Across town, the Harringtons' ballroom was filling with guests. Lydia's wedding planner would be barking instructions. The band would be tuning up. Mom would be making sure every napkin corner faced the same way. And somewhere between champagne glasses and floral arches, a phone would ring. It didn't take long. At 9:17, my phone buzzed. Mom. I didn't answer. Then Lydia. Then again. And again. Finally, I turned the phone over, watching the name Lydia flash against the black screen like a heartbeat. I let it ring until it stopped. A few minutes later, Rachel texted, "It's happening. Already. Oh yeah, she's losing it." Someone leaked a video to the bridal group chat. She's screaming at the coordinator. Looks like the venue just told her the payment didn't clear. I took a sip of my now cold coffee. She's efficient when she panics. Rachel replied, "You okay? Better than okay? Balanced." I set the phone down and stared at the rain streaking the window. It wasn't satisfaction, I felt it was quiet, like the kind that settles after you stop holding your breath for too long. By 10, my voicemail was full. I finally pressed play. Mom's voice came first, sharp and frantic. "Hannah, what did you do?" The hotel says the entire event was cancelled under your name. This is your sister's wedding. Call me immediately. Then, Lydia's voice brittle shaking, you need to fix this right now. Do you hear me? Everyone's here, Hannah. Everyone. They're saying the ballroom isn't paid for. I don't know what game you're playing, but you've gone too far. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood open the curtains wider and let the morning light spill across the table. The city was gray and gleaming, the rain turning the pavement to glass. At 10:30, Rachel called. I picked up. They're calling it the ghost wedding, she said, half whispering, half laughing. Someone live-streamed it. The whole thing empty, ballroom guests standing around Lydia, crying, your mom arguing with the hotel manager. I didn't plan for that part, I said quietly. You didn't have to. Karma's got better production value than Netflix. I smiled, small and tired. I don't want it to go viral. It already is, Rachel said. There's a clip of Lydia yelling, call my sister, she's ruined my life. People are obsessed. I leaned back in the chair, pressing a hand to my forehead. Of course they are. They always love a spectacle. Rachel hesitated. You don't sound happy. I'm not unhappy, I said. Just done. By noon, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, streaking gold across the wet streets. I opened the window, letting the air rush in fresh and metallic. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. Mom, I said. Her voice was trembling, half anger, half disbelief. You humiliated us. Do you understand what you've done? There are guests, photographers, an entire wedding with no venue, no catering, nothing. I returned what was mine, I said calmly. You could have talked to us. I tried, I said. You called me dramatic. You told me to let it go. This isn't letting it go, she snapped. This is revenge. No, I said. This is a receipt. She went silent for a moment. I could almost hear her, realizing she didn't know what to say. Your father's furious, she said finally. Lydia's heartbroken. You've destroyed this family. I didn't destroy anything, Mom. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. Her voice softened, pleading now. She's your sister. Please, fix this before it's too late. It's already fixed, I said, and hung up. The silence that followed was almost holy. I poured another cup of coffee and sat back down, my hands steady. My phone vibrated again, over and over, until the sound became part of the background noise, like rain, like wind. Around 1, Rachel sent me another message. They're saying the hotel is refunding the guests. The whole thing's trending on Twitter now. I typed back. Then maybe people will finally believe me when I say she took what wasn't hers. She replied, You really don't feel bad? I stared at the screen for a long moment. No, not bad. Just finished. Outside, the light was shifting. The clouds breaking apart completely now, sunlight, glinting off wet roofs and windows. The kind of light that makes everything look sharper, more defined. I thought about Lydia standing in her wedding dress, makeup, streaked guests, murmuring around, her mom somewhere in the background trying to patch it together. I didn't imagine her crying. I didn't need to. I'd lived in that place before, when you realize the story you built isn't yours anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she'd finally learn what it felt like to lose something you thought was secure. By evening, the internet had done what it always does, turned pain into spectacle. Bride left venueless after mix-up. Sister sabotages $80 Kelvin's wedding. Family feud at the Harrington Grand. I read none of it, but I could feel it spreading like a rumor with wings. Rachel called again. It's everywhere, Hannah. They're already calling her the runaway bride without a ballroom. She ran out of places to hide, I said quietly. Rachel paused. You sound almost sorry. Maybe I am, I said. Not for what I did. For how much it had to take to make them finally see me. The city outside glowed amber as the sun sank behind the skyline. I stood by the window, the air still carrying the faint scent of rain. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's story. I felt real, solid, seen. My phone buzzed again, a new message from Lydia. You win. Happy now, you ruined the best day of my life. I hope it was worth it. I typed back, I didn't ruin your day. You did when you spent my savings and called it love. Then I deleted it before sending. Some truths don't need witnesses. I closed my laptop, turned off my phone, and poured the last of the coffee into the sink. The light outside had gone soft and gold, the city humming low. Justice didn't look like fire or fury. It looked like stillness after a storm. And that evening, for the first time in years, I let myself sit in it, quiet, calm, complete. 3 days passed before anyone in my family spoke to me again. The silence was heavy but not unfamiliar. It was the same kind that used to hang in the house when I was growing up, thick, strategic, meant to make you fold first. I didn't. On the morning of the 4th day, a letter arrived. White envelope, neat cursive, no return address. But I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. My mother's. I sat at the kitchen table staring at it for a long minute before tearing it open. Hannah, it began. You've embarrassed this family beyond words. Lydia may never recover from what you've done. Your father and I are humiliated. We raised you better than this. You've proven that spite will always win over love in your heart. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. Until then, please do not contact us. It wasn't signed Love Mom, just Margaret. I read it twice, then folded it carefully back into the envelope. Not out of respect, but out of habit. Old instincts die hard. I placed it in the drawer with unpaid bills and broken pens, things that once had purpose but didn't anymore. For a while, I just sat there listening to the hum of the refrigerator. It was almost funny how predictable her words were. I could have written them myself years ago, back when I still cared what she thought. By afternoon, Rachel came by. The moment she saw my face, she asked what happened. I handed her the letter. She read it quickly, her jaw tightening with each line. Wow, she said softly. Your mom really knows how to weaponize guilt. I let out a dry laugh. It's her love language. Rachel set the letter down and met my eyes. Don't let this pull you back in. You did what you had to do. I know, I said. I just thought maybe part of her would understand. Rachel shook her head. People like that don't want understanding. They want control. I didn't reply. I just watched the rain starting again outside, soft and steady against the glass. That evening, the city was quiet. I turned on the radio just to fill the space, some old jazz station that crackled between notes. I stood by the window, watching lights flicker in the neighboring buildings, little glimpses of other lives, other dinners, other versions of peace. Then my phone buzzed, a voicemail notification. It was my father. Hannah, he said, his voice weary but calm. Your mother's upset. She's processing. Lydia's not doing well either. I know you think this was justice, and maybe it was, but it's tearing the family apart. Please, just call your mother. She misses you. We all do. He paused before adding quietly, You're still my daughter, no matter what. The words landed somewhere I didn't expect, soft, painful. I played it again just to hear the way he said still. Later that night, I found myself in my studio, surrounded by old photographs I hadn't looked at in months. Weddings, portraits, smiling faces, frozen in perfect light. They all looked like lies now, moments posed to look like happiness. I picked up one photo that stopped me cold. 2 little girls standing in front of a magnolia tree. Lydia was beaming front and center, sunlight catching her hair. I was beside her, a step behind, half out of the frame. Even as kids, we had our assigned places. She was the favorite, I was the filler. I slid the photo back into the box. Not anymore, I whispered. For the first time since the wedding, I pulled out my camera. I set it on the tripod and adjusted the lens. The reflection staring back at me in the viewfinder looked older, tired, but steady. I pressed the timer and sat on the floor in front of it. The shutter clicked. The sound echoed through the room like a truth finally spoken. The photo wasn't flattering. My eyes were red, my hair a mess, my mouth pressed into something between defiance and relief. But it was honest. For once, I didn't care if honesty was ugly. The next morning, I emailed the picture to an old friend, Maria, a gallery curator I hadn't spoken to in years. The subject line read, "Something different." I didn't expect her to reply, but she did an hour later. "It's haunting," she wrote. "You should show it. People need to see what truth looks like." I stared at the screen, her words replaying in my head. People need to see what truth looks like. Maybe they did. That afternoon, I took a walk down to the lake. The air smelled like wet pavement and pine. I sat on a bench watching ducks drift across the surface, their ripples spreading wide and slow. For the first time, I thought about what came next. Not the revenge, not the wreckage, but after. Maybe this was the point all along. Not to hurt them, to stop letting them define me. When I got home, I began sketching in a notebook. Ideas, fragments, images. A photography series not about weddings or perfection, but about what comes after destruction. About reclamation. The title came to me without effort, uninvited. The word felt right. I spent the next few days shooting. Empty rooms, broken flowers, reflections in glass. Every frame was quiet, deliberate, real. I photographed myself too, hands in motion, eyes half closed, unposed. It felt like breathing again. When I showed a few shots to Maria, she replied immediately. "These are extraordinary, honest. Let's talk about a show." I stared at her message, barely believing it. For years, I'd photographed other people's moments. Now, for the first time, I was capturing my own. The next morning, I woke to another voicemail from my father. His voice sounded different this time, tired, almost gentle. "I saw the photos online," he said. "They're beautiful, Hannah. I think your mother saw them too." She didn't say much, but she looked at them for a long time. "I just wanted you to know that." He paused. "Your sister's still not speaking to anyone. She's ashamed, I think. But maybe that's not a bad place to start." Then quietly, "I'm proud of you." I listened twice before deleting it. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to keep the memory as it was clean, unedited. Later that night, Rachel came over with takeout and wine. We sat on the floor surrounded by prints and open boxes. "You're really doing it," she said, picking up one of the photos. "Turning pain into art." "I guess it's all I ever knew how to do," I said. She smiled. "Then maybe you were never the villain in this story, just the author." We clinked glasses. The sound rang through the room, light, simple, final. After she left, I stood by the window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Lydia was still unraveling. Mom was still angry, and Dad was still trying to make peace with both. But for once, I didn't feel like their orbit. I was the center of my own. The night air drifted in through the open window, cool and steady. My camera sat on the table, still warm from use. I picked it up one last time, aimed it at my reflection, and pressed the shutter. Click. The image appeared on the small screen, me standing in the half-light, eyes open, unafraid. And just like that, I realized I hadn't taken a picture. I'd taken proof. Proof that I was still here. Proof that silence didn't erase me. Proof that revenge had ended and something truer had taken its place. Peace. The morning of the gallery meeting, I woke before the alarm. The city was still half asleep, bathed in that soft gray light that makes everything feel possible. I stood by the window, holding my coffee, watching the fog slide over the rooftops. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel heavy. It felt open. Maria had sent me the details the night before. Small, local gallery, intimate crowd, bring 10 to 12 prints. I'd printed 15. My dining table was covered with them, faces, hands, reflections, silence. Every piece carried a small part of what I couldn't say out loud. When I arrived, Maria was already there. She greeted me with a hug that felt like sunlight. "You look lighter," she said. "I think I am," I said, glancing around the empty gallery. White walls, high ceilings, the smell of new paint. She led me to a long wooden table. "Let's lay them out." We spread the photos across the surface, arranging and rearranging, until the stories started to find each other. My favorite was still the self-portrait I'd taken the night of Lydia's wedding. Eyes swollen, lips pressed tight, raw and unfiltered. Maria stopped at that one, her finger hovering just above the print. "This," she said. "This belongs in the center. It's the heart of the collection." "It's not pretty," I said quietly. "It's honest," she replied, "and that's rarer." For a moment we just stood there in silence, surrounded by fragments of my life turned into art. I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who once flinched at every demand, every guilt-laced word from my family. Now those words were just echoes, powerless. When we finished, Maria handed me a glass of water. "You ready for opening night?" "Ready as I'll ever be," she smiled. "Good. Because this isn't just an exhibit, Hannah. It's a confession, and confessions, when they're true, change people." That night, I walked home through the city, the air cool and clean. The lights of shop windows shimmered on the wet pavement. I passed a couple arguing softly outside a cafe, then laughing a moment later. Life, I realized, was full of contradictions like that, hurt and healing intertwined. When I got home, I opened my laptop and found a new email waiting from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "You should be ashamed." For a second, I thought it was spam until I opened it and saw the words, "You've dragged your family's name through the mud. Whatever pain you have, you didn't need to make it public. Some things should stay private." No signature, no name, just venom. I stared at it, then deleted it without replying. I'd spent most of my life apologizing for telling the truth. I wasn't about to start again. The next morning, I met Rachel for breakfast. She was already halfway through her pancakes when I sat down. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" "Like you stopped waiting for someone to give you permission to exist." I smiled. "Maybe I finally did." Rachel took a sip of her coffee. "So I heard Lydia's back in town." I froze mid-bite. "What, someone saw her at the cafe on Maple? Alone?" I set my fork down. "Mom didn't tell me." "Would you have answered if she did?" "No," I admitted. "But still," Rachel studied me carefully. "You going to see her, I don't know." "You should," she said softly. "Not to fix it, just to end it." I didn't answer. That evening I found myself driving down Maple Street anyway. The cafe was small, the kind with fogged-up windows and low jazz humming inside. Through the glass I saw her. Lydia, sitting by herself at a corner table, a cup of tea untouched in front of her. She looked smaller somehow, like the light that used to follow her had dimmed. I almost turned back, but something in me said no. Not this time. When I walked in, her eyes met mine instantly. For a moment she just stared, then whispered, "You came." I sat across from her. "You look tired, so do you." Silence hung between us, sharp and fragile. "I saw the photos," she said finally. "They're everywhere. People keep sending them to me." "I didn't send them to anyone," I said. "I know," she said, voice cracking a little. "They're good, Hannah. Painful but good." I didn't know how to respond. Compliments from her had always come with barbs, but this one felt real. She stirred her tea, watching the liquid swirl. "I keep thinking about that day," she said. "The wedding." I didn't sleep for weeks after. Everyone stopped calling. Mom wouldn't even look at me. "Now you know how it feels," I said quietly. She nodded slowly. "I deserved that." I waited, but she didn't elaborate. "I didn't do it to ruin you," I said finally. "I just wanted you to understand that what you took wasn't money. It was trust." Lydia's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "I know, I was stupid. I thought I could have everything, and that you'd just forgive me like always." "That's the problem," I said. "You never noticed how many times I already had." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The cafe around us buzzed quietly, cups clinking, conversations rising and falling like background music. Then, she said something that broke whatever wall was left between us. "I don't hate you, Hannah. I just don't know how to forgive you." "I don't need you to," I said softly. "Just stop pretending I don't exist." She looked up, and for the first time in years, her expression wasn't superior or defensive. It was human. Mom's still angry, she said. She says you'll regret it. Maybe, I said. But at least if I do, it'll be mine to carry. When we stood to leave, she hesitated, then reached out, touching my arm lightly. Thank you for coming, she said. I didn't expect you to, I nodded. I didn't expect me to either. Outside, the air smelled like rain again. She walked one way, I walked the other. Neither of us looked back. That night, I lay in bed replaying the conversation. It wasn't closure, not really. But it was something cleaner, truth without performance. The next morning, a new email from Maria waited in my inbox. Confirmed the gallery show Uninvited opens next Friday. Press will be there. Prepare for attention. I smiled. Attention used to terrify me. Now it just felt like acknowledgement. I spent the next few days printing final copies, signing each one carefully in the bottom corner. Every stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I hadn't known was missing. On Friday morning, Rachel showed up at my apartment with flowers. For the star of the show, she said, grinning. I'm not a star, I said. She rolled her eyes. Fine. For the woman who taught Karma how to use a camera. I laughed, shaking my head. You're ridiculous. She followed me to the gallery, helping carry the framed prints. Inside, people were already gathering: photographers, art critics, strangers. The low hum of conversation filled the air. Maria spotted me and waved. You made it, she said. They love it already. Look at them. I turned. A crowd had formed around my self-portrait. Some were whispering, some just standing silently. A woman with gray hair wiped her eyes. Rachel leaned in. You see that you didn't just get even, you made people feel. I looked around the room at the light on the walls, at the photos that once lived only in my pain, and something inside me finally loosened. For the first time, I understood what freedom actually felt like. Not loud, not triumphant, just still, steady, earned. And as I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage I'd turned into art, I whispered under my breath. This was never about revenge. It was about remembering what I deserve. The gallery was fuller than I expected. The air buzzed softly, with murmurs, heels clicking against the polished floor, the low hum of a crowd pretending not to stare. I stood near the far wall, half hidden behind one of my larger prints, watching strangers linger in front of my work. It was strange seeing my pain framed under glass lit by soft spotlights. Maria moved through the crowd gracefully, offering wine, answering questions. When she caught my eye, she smiled, mouthing, They love it. I nodded, unsure what love meant in this context. Did they love the colors, the composition? Or the story they could sense behind it? The one no one could fix. A woman in her 60s approached me, clutching her purse. You're the artist, aren't you? She asked, voice trembling slightly. I am. She looked at a photograph beside us, an empty chair, sunlight spilling over its back. This one, she said quietly. It feels like forgiveness. I swallowed. Maybe it is. She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. My sister and I haven't spoken in 20 years, she whispered. This made me think about calling her. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. All I could do was nod and say, You should. She smiled faintly and walked away. I stood there a long time staring at that photograph like I'd never seen it before. At some point, Maria touched my arm. There's someone here asking for you, she said softly. Older woman. Beige goat pearls. Looks determined. My stomach tightened. I turned toward the entrance, and there she was, my mother. She looked exactly as she always had, composed, elegant. Her hair perfectly set, her eyes sharp enough to slice through glass. She moved slowly, scanning the photos one by one, her expression unreadable. Are you sure you want to do this? Maria whispered. Yes, I said, even though my throat felt tight. When she reached me, she didn't smile. So, she said, her tone clipped. It's true. You turned our family into an exhibit. It's not about you, I said evenly. She tilted her head, her voice low but cutting. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? People are talking. You've exposed private things that should have stayed in the family. They were never private, I said. They were buried. There's a difference. Her eyes flashed. You think this makes you strong? No, I said quietly. It makes me honest. For a moment she didn't speak. She looked around at the photos again, at the one of my hands clutching the camera, the one of the empty church pews, the self-portrait where I looked too raw to be staged. Her gaze lingered on that one. You look small in this, she said softly. I said. I was still trying to fit into a picture you approved of. Her lips parted, then closed again. She didn't have a script for this version of me. Grace doesn't deserve what you did, she said finally. She deserved honesty, I said, and so did I. Her composure cracked for half a second, just enough for me to see the fear, or maybe regret behind it. You've changed, she murmured. I stopped apologizing, I said. Maria appeared then, calling my name. They want a photo with you by the main piece, she said, gesturing toward the center wall. I turned to my mother. You don't have to understand this, I said. You just have to let it exist. She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the photographs like they were ghosts. When the flash went off, she flinched slightly, then turned and walked away. I didn't follow her. After the last guest left, the gallery was quiet again. Maria handed me a glass of champagne. To starting over, she said. I raised mine, to no longer waiting for permission. When I got home that night, the city lights glowed against the windows, and the silence felt warm instead of empty. I took off my shoes, poured another small glass of wine, and sat on the floor surrounded by my proofs. Each photo looked different now, less like a wound, more like a scar. Healed, but visible. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from my father. His voice was gentle, hesitant. I saw the photos online, he said. They're beautiful, Hannah. Your mother, she's upset, but I think she needed to see them. I'm proud of you. Call me when you can. I listened to it twice, smiling faintly. Some words were better remembered as echoes. By noon, Maria called. You're not going to believe this, she said, excitement spilling through the line. A magazine wants to feature the exhibit. They called it Raw, Modern, Unapologetic. I laughed softly. That's one way to say it. It's big, Hannah. This could change your career. I'm not sure I want to chase careers anymore, I said. I just want to keep telling the truth. That's exactly why it'll work, she said. The world's finally listening. After we hung up, I went to the window. The lake shimmered under the late morning light, calm and endless. My phone buzzed again, another message, this time from my father. Your mother wrote something for you. She asked me to give it to you. An hour later, he stopped by the gallery with an envelope. We didn't talk much. He just handed it to me and said quietly, She's trying in her way. After he left, I sat on the bench by the far wall and opened it. The handwriting was shaky this time, uneven, rushed. Hannah, it began. I watched your interview last night. You looked calm. Maybe for the first time I saw you instead of the version I made you be. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I see what I missed. You were never too much. I was just too afraid of being less. Mom, I read it 3 times before realizing my vision had blurred. It wasn't an apology, not entirely. But it was something close to recognition. And that was enough. When I looked up, Maria was standing across the room watching me quietly. You okay? She asked. I think so, I said. She finally saw me. Maria smiled. Took her long enough. I laughed through the ache. Light travels slow. Later that afternoon, the gallery filled again for a press walkthrough. Maria gave a short speech. This exhibit, she said, isn't just about healing. It's about reclaiming space the moment a woman stops editing herself to fit someone else's frame. People applauded, but I barely heard them. I was watching the sunlight move across the floor, golden and alive, painting everything it touched. Afterward, Rachel appeared at my side, grinning. You realize what this is, right? What proof that you turned chaos into clarity. That's art, I smiled. It's life. We left the gallery as the sky began to blush with evening. Outside the city pulsed quietly, the wind warm and forgiving. For once, I didn't look back to see if my mother was watching. I didn't need her eyes on me anymore. The truth was already framed, and it was mine. The day of my second exhibit felt nothing like the first. There were no nerves, no restless heartbeat waiting for approval, just calm, the kind that comes after you've already lost everything you were afraid to lose. The gallery was larger this time, brighter, the kind of space that swallowed light and gave it back softer. My new series lined the walls, images of quiet rebirth and reflection. I called it Light Again. Maria had insisted on the title. "It's who you are now," she'd said, and maybe she was right. When I arrived, the crowd was already trickling in. Reporters, photographers, art students clutching notebooks, people I didn't know who smiled at me like they'd been waiting for this story to find them. I stood by the entrance, nodding politely, pretending I wasn't a little overwhelmed. Then I saw him. My father standing near the doorway, hands in his pockets. He looked older, lines deeper, shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes were soft. He smiled when he saw me, uncertain but proud. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" he said when I reached him. I smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Your mother didn't want me to," he admitted. "But sometimes you have to pick peace, not the person." Something inside me loosened. "Thank you," I said quietly. He looked around at the photographs, studying each one with the quiet reverence of someone walking through a memory. "They're honest," he said finally. "Your mother wouldn't understand them, but I do." His voice broke slightly at the end. I saw it, the pride he'd always buried under politeness. We stood in silence for a while before he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "She wanted me to give you this." I hesitated, staring at it. "Another letter." He nodded. "This one's different." When he walked away, I sat on the bench near the far wall and opened it. The handwriting was uneven this time, the ink faint in places like she'd pressed too softly. "Hannah," it began, "I watched your interview. You looked peaceful. Maybe for the first time I saw you instead of the version I needed you to be. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I see what I missed. You were never too much. I was just too afraid of being less. Mom." I read it 3 times. It wasn't absolution, but it was something like truth, and that was enough. When I looked up, the room was full, people moving slowly between frames, pausing to study, to feel. Maria caught my eye and lifted her glass in a silent toast. I nodded back. A journalist approached me. "Your work's been described as redefining the art of reclamation," she said. "Would you agree?" I thought for a moment. "I don't know about redefining," I said. "I just stopped hiding." She smiled, jotting something down. "That's your quote of the night." As she walked away, I turned to the photograph in the center of the room, the one I'd taken a month ago. A self-portrait this time, not in pain but in motion. My face turned toward the light, hair caught midair, eyes open. For years, I'd been the woman watching from behind the lens, always adjusting, always waiting for permission to capture the moment. Now I was the subject in the frame. Ethan appeared beside me, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He handed me one. "You did it," he said. "I didn't fix everything," I said. He smiled. "You stopped breaking yourself to fix others. That's enough." We stood there together, watching people move from one photo to the next. Some smiled, some cried. A few stood silent, like they'd been seen for the first time. Rachel found me an hour later. "It's official," she said, waving her phone. "Your exhibit's trending. They're calling you the woman who turned betrayal into beauty." I groaned softly. "That sounds like a Hallmark movie." She laughed. "Maybe. But it's true. I don't want it to be about betrayal," I said. "It's about what comes after." Rachel studied me for a moment, her eyes soft. "You know that's what makes it powerful. You didn't just win. You transformed." The night blurred after that, flashes of cameras. Hushed congratulations. Laughter I didn't have to force. When the crowd finally began to thin, I walked to the far corner of the gallery, where one last photo hung, a quiet image of an open window, sheer curtains blowing in the wind. The caption beneath it read, "Freedom doesn't need applause." I stood there for a long time. My father found me again before leaving. "She'll come around, you know," he said. "Maybe," I replied, "but I'm not waiting anymore." He nodded. "Good." He kissed my forehead before walking away, his hand lingering on my shoulder just long enough for me to feel what words couldn't carry. When the gallery emptied, Maria turned off the main lights, leaving only the soft spots glowing on the photos. "You did it," she said quietly. "I just told the truth." That's harder than it sounds. Outside, the city was warm, the night alive with laughter and streetlights. Ethan and I walked side by side down Madison Street, the air smelling faintly of rain and late summer jasmine. "You know," he said, glancing at me, "the first time I saw you, you were photographing someone else's story. Now the world's photographing yours." I smiled. Maybe that's what growing up is, realizing you were never just the observer. We stopped at a small cafe near the lake, the same one where I'd spent so many mornings alone. The waitress recognized me from the magazine cover that had run the day before. She brought over 2 drinks on the house. "For the brave one," she said with a wink. I laughed softly. "I'm not brave, I'm just done being quiet." Ethan leaned back, his gaze steady and warm. "So what's next?" "I think I'll teach," I said. "Workshops, maybe. Help other photographers tell their stories, the ones they've been too afraid to frame." He nodded. "You'd be good at that. I just want to remind people that truth doesn't always look perfect. Sometimes it looks like survival." He smiled. "There's your next headline." We left the cafe as the sky faded from pink to lavender. I stopped at the lake's edge, pulled out my camera, and lifted it toward the horizon. The water shimmered, the last of the sunlight catching its surface. I pressed the shutter. The sound clicked softly, familiar grounding. When I looked at the screen, I saw the reflection of 2 figures, close but unposed, the lake behind them endless. "It's not perfect," I said. Ethan looked over my shoulder. "That's why it's beautiful." We walked home as the city lights came alive one by one like small promises against the dark. Later, on my balcony, I took out my mother's letter again. The paper had already begun to crease at the edges. I read it once more, slower this time, letting each word settle where it belonged. "You were never too much." The night air was soft against my skin. Somewhere below, I could hear the rhythm of waves brushing against the shore, steady and sure. I lifted my camera one last time and pointed it toward the skyline. The lights shimmered, the glass towers glowed, and in the distance, the horizon pulsed like a heartbeat. Click. The photo appeared on the screen, blurred edges, imperfect focus, but alive. I smiled. I'd once been the sister left out, the daughter silenced, the woman told she was too much. Now I was the storyteller, the artist, the proof that light doesn't ask permission to exist. And as the night folded itself around the city, I whispered to the quiet world below, "If you've ever been uninvited, remember, you don't need a door to walk into your own story." Then I set the camera down and let the silence hold me, calm and whole, knowing that this time, it was finally mine. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever had to fight for your own light. Because if you have, then you already know your glow was never theirs to take.